It was a clear Friday night when Liam decided to take a long drive to clear his mind. His week had been rough, too many deadlines, not enough sleep. He thought the quiet of the open road, with nothing but the hum of his engine and the occasional flicker of the streetlights, might help him unwind. He wasn't too concerned about the time. It was just after midnight, and the country road he was on stretched out for miles, with hardly any other cars in sight. The first hour was peaceful. Liam played soft music and allowed his thoughts to drift. But soon the road ahead became more desolate, and his surroundings seemed unnaturally quiet. The fields on either side of him were nothing but inky darkness, occasionally interrupted by a lonely tree swaying in the wind. Despite the isolation, Liam felt oddly at ease, until his headlights flickered. At first, it was just a brief pulse, almost like a glitch. Then it happened again, this time for a few seconds longer. His dashboard lights dimmed and his radio cut out. "Great," he muttered, thinking it was just a mechanical issue. But the car kept moving, so he decided to push on. He was too far from home to turn back, and there was no sign of a gas station or rest stop. A few minutes later, the flickering stopped. Relieved, Liam turned his focus back to the road. But just as his shoulders relaxed, he saw something out of the corner of his eye. A figure, a man, standing at the side of the road. His clothes were dark, his face obscured by the shadows, but what startled Liam the most was how still he was. The man didn't move an inch, didn't seem to react to the car speeding by. Liam's heart raced. There was something unsettling about seeing a person in such a remote area, especially at this hour. He glanced in his rearview mirror to see if the man had moved, but the road behind him was empty. Shaking it off as his imagination, Liam pressed down on the accelerator, eager to reach the next town. For a while, nothing unusual happened, but soon his headlights began flickering again, this time accompanied by a strange static sound from the radio, even though it was turned off. His car started to slow, the engine sputtering as though it were about to die. Panic began to rise in his chest. Suddenly, a loud thud came from the roof of his car. It sounded like something or someone had landed on top of it. Liam slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding in his ears. He sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel, unable to move. The seconds dragged on, the only sound the ticking of his engine cooling down. He finally mustered the courage to look up at the rearview mirror. In the dim light, he saw a figure standing behind his car. A man, the same man he had seen earlier on the side of the road. Liam's breath hitched. How had he gotten there so fast? The man's face was still obscured, but this time he moved. Slowly, the figure raised his arm and pointed down the road. Liam's blood ran cold as he realized the man wasn't pointing at him, but at something or someone up ahead. Trembling, he turned his gaze back to the road. About 50 feet in front of him stood another figure, a woman this time, dressed in white, her face pale and gaunt. Liam's instinct screamed at him to drive, to get away as fast as possible, but the car wouldn't start. His hands fumbled with the ignition as the woman began walking toward him, her movements slow and deliberate. The thudding on the roof returned, this time accompanied by scratching sounds, as though something was trying to claw its way inside. With a final desperate turn of the key, the engine roared back to life. Liam slammed on the gas, the car lurching forward just as the woman's hand brushed against the hood. His tires squealed as he sped away, but the fear gnawing at his chest told him he wasn't alone. He glanced in the rearview mirror again and froze. Both the man and the woman were standing in the middle of the road, watching him. Worse, he saw movement from the back seat, a brief, chilling glimpse of someone or something sitting there. His heart thundered in his chest as he whipped his head around. The back seat was empty. Breathing heavily, he forced himself to focus on the road. He had to get out of here. Just when he thought he'd escaped, a figure darted in front of his car. He swerved violently, the tires screeching as the car spun off the road and into a ditch. His head hit the steering wheel hard, and everything went black. When Liam came to, it was still dark. His car was dead, the engine hissing as steam rose from the hood. Dazed, he stumbled out, looking around for help. That's when he saw them again, the man and the woman, standing just beyond the ditch, their eyes fixed on him. Liam's legs felt like lead as he tried to run, but no matter how far he went, they seemed to follow, their footsteps silent, their expressions devoid of emotion. He knew then that he wasn't going to make it out of this night. Slowly, the figure raised his arm and pointed down the road. Liam's blood ran cold as he realized the man wasn't pointing at him, but at something or someone up ahead. Trembling, he turned his gaze back to the road. About 50 feet in front of him stood another figure, a woman this time, dressed in white, her face pale and gaunt. Liam's instincts screamed at him to drive, to get away as fast as possible, but the car wouldn't start. His hands fumbled with the ignition as the woman began walking toward him, her movements slow and deliberate. The thudding on the roof returned, this time accompanied by scratching sounds, as though something was trying to claw its way inside. With a final desperate turn of the key, the engine roared back to life. Liam slammed on the gas, the car lurching forward just as the woman's hand brushed against the hood. His tires squealed as he sped away, but the fear gnawing at his chest told him he wasn't alone. He glanced in the rearview mirror again and froze. Both the man and the woman were standing in the middle of the road, watching him. Worse, he saw movement from the back seat, a brief, chilling glimpse of someone or something sitting there. His heart thundered in his chest as he whipped his head around. The back seat was empty. Breathing heavily, he forced himself to focus on the road. He had to get out of here. Just when he thought he'd escaped, a figure darted in front of his car. He swerved violently, the tires screeching as the car spun off the road and into a ditch. His head hit the steering wheel hard, and everything went black. When Liam came to, it was still dark. His car was dead, the engine hissing as steam rose from the hood. Dazed, he stumbled out, looking around for help. That's when he saw them again, the man and the woman, standing just beyond the ditch, their eyes fixed on him. Liam's legs felt like lead as he tried to run, but no matter how far he went, they seemed to follow, their footsteps silent, their expressions devoid of emotion. He knew then that he wasn't going to make it out of this night. But as she continued driving, the road seemed endless. The trees were taller now, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers above her. Every mile felt like she was getting further away from home, not closer. Her sense of time started to warp. Had she been driving for hours? Days? Mia glanced at the clock again, 1:13 a.m. The same time as before. The hairs on her arms stood on end. How could it still be 1:13? Suddenly, the fog in front of her car parted like a curtain, revealing a figure standing in the middle of the road. A woman. She was drenched, her white dress clinging to her body as if she had just climbed out of a lake. Her head was bowed, long, tangled hair covering her face. Mia's breath caught in her throat as the woman lifted her head slowly, revealing a face that was wrong. Her eyes were completely black, and her mouth was stretched into an unnatural grin. Mia slammed on the brakes again, but it was too late. The woman moved faster than any human should, her cold, bony fingers slamming against the car window, her face inches from Mia's. Mia screamed, her foot hitting the gas pedal, in panic. The woman vanished, but the chill lingered in the air, colder than before. As she sped down the road, the black-eyed woman appeared again, this time standing just outside her window, keeping pace with the car. "Turn back," a voice whispered inside Mia's head, but it wasn't her own. Her heart thundered in her chest, and she realized the woman wasn't the only thing wrong with this road. Mia glanced in her rearview mirror. There was no road behind her anymore, only an endless, suffocating darkness. The road ahead twisted and turned, and as she rounded the next bend, she saw it. A bridge, old and dilapidated, with wooden planks missing. Beyond it was a sheer drop into a deep, foggy abyss. The voice whispered again, "Turn back, Mia." But she couldn't stop now, not with that woman following her. With no other choice, she gripped the wheel and aimed for the narrow stretch of remaining bridge. But just as her tires touched the first plank, the wood gave way. Her car plunged forward, her body weightless as it fell into the darkness below. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the figure of the woman, now standing at the edge of the bridge, watching as Mia plummeted into the void. The clock ticked toward midnight as Sarah, a 28-year-old nurse, finished her shift at the hospital. She was tired, but the adrenaline of a hectic night kept her alert. The streets outside were empty as she climbed into her car, ready for the long drive home through the isolated, winding roads of her small town. She plugged her phone into the car's auxiliary port, hoping some music would keep her spirits up during the drive. The first few minutes were uneventful, and the soft glow of her dashboard lights contrasted sharply with the darkness outside. The moon hung low, casting an eerie silver light over the road. As she drove further into the countryside, the road became narrower and less well lit. Sarah turned up the volume, immersing herself in the music, when suddenly, her headlights caught a flicker in the shadows beside the road. Startled, she squinted into the darkness, but saw nothing. Probably just an animal, she thought, shaking off a chill that crept up her spine. A few moments later, her headlights illuminated a figure standing by the roadside, a woman in a tattered dress, her long hair hanging over her face. "What the hell?" Sarah muttered, slowing down. As she got closer, she could see the woman's eyes, wide and filled with fear. Instinctively, Sarah felt a pull of empathy. She rolled down her window. "Do you need help?" she called out. The woman looked up, revealing gaunt features and dirt-smudged skin. "Please, I need a ride," she gasped, glancing over her shoulder into the darkness behind her. Sarah hesitated, a wave of unease washing over her. The roads were desolate, and picking up a stranger could be dangerous, but something about the woman's frantic demeanor made her heart ache. "Okay," she finally said, unlocking the passenger door. The woman climbed in without a word, clutching a small, dirty backpack. As Sarah continued down the road, she stole glances at her passenger. The woman stared out the window, her face pale, trembling slightly. "Where are you headed?" Sarah asked, trying to break the silence. "I just want to get home," the woman whispered, her voice shaking. "Where's home?" The woman's gaze drifted back to Sarah, her eyes darting with fear. "Just drive, please." Feeling a growing sense of discomfort, Sarah obeyed, focusing on the road ahead. The quiet was suffocating, punctuated only by the faint sound of the music playing in the background. After several minutes, Sarah asked again, "Are you okay? Did someone hurt you?" The woman turned to her, her eyes suddenly fierce. "Just keep driving," she shouted, causing Sarah to flinch. Fear coursed through Sarah as she drove faster, glancing nervously at her rearview mirror. The darkness behind them felt heavy, as if it were closing in. Just then, Sarah spotted a shadowy figure emerging from the trees, its outline growing clearer. It was a man, and he was running toward them, his face twisted in rage. "Faster!" the woman screamed, panic-stricken. "He's coming!" Sarah's heart raced as she pressed the accelerator. The man was gaining on them, his frantic movements accentuated by the flickering light of her headlights. She could hear the thud of footsteps against the gravel road, the sound echoing in her ears like a death knell. Suddenly, Sarah spotted a sign for a gas station up ahead. It was closed, but she knew it was a place to stop. "I'm pulling over!" she yelled, veering into the parking lot. "No! Don't stop!" the woman shrieked, but it was too late. Sarah slammed on the brakes, and they skidded to a stop. The man was almost upon them, his expression a mask of anger and desperation. As he approached, Sarah's instincts screamed at her to escape. She locked the doors, her hands shaking as she looked at the woman, who was now trembling uncontrollably. The man reached their car, rapping his knuckles on the window. "Let her out! She belongs with me." His voice was a low growl, filled with rage. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she glanced at the woman, whose face had turned ashen. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaky. "Just let her go," he repeated, his eyes dark with a wild intensity. "You don't know what you're getting involved in." "Please," the woman cried, grabbing Sarah's arm. "You have to trust me. He's not who he says he is." The man's face twisted into a sneer. "She's lying. Let me take her home." Before Sarah could respond, the woman suddenly flung open the passenger door, yanking Sarah's arm as she tried to escape. "Run!" the woman shouted, and without thinking, Sarah scrambled out of the car, her heart racing as they dashed toward the shadows behind the gas station. The man roared in anger, chasing after them. They slipped into the darkness, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and decay. Sarah could hear the man's footsteps pounding closer, but adrenaline fueled her as they navigated the narrow alleyways behind the gas station. Just as Sarah thought they'd escaped, she stumbled over a broken pipe, falling to the ground. The woman quickly pulled her up, her face a mix of fear and determination. "This way," she urged, pulling Sarah toward a rusty fence. As they climbed over, Sarah glanced back to see the man emerging from the shadows, his eyes blazing with fury. "You can't escape," he bellowed, voice echoing through the darkness. They landed on the other side, breathless and terrified. The woman led Sarah down a hidden path through the thick brush, whispering urgently, "We have to keep moving." But Sarah's mind raced with questions. "Who are you? What's happening?" "I can explain later, but we don't have time. He's dangerous. He's been looking for me." The woman's voice trembled as she spoke, her desperation palpable. They continued to run until they reached a small clearing, the moonlight spilling over them. The woman stopped suddenly, turning to face Sarah. "You have to believe me. He's not a man. He's something else." Before Sarah could ask what she meant, the man burst into the clearing, his face a mask of rage. "You think you can hide from me?" he snarled, but as he stepped into the moonlight, Sarah felt a cold chill wash over her. His features were distorted, almost otherworldly, as if he had shed his humanity. The woman stepped protectively in front of Sarah. "Stay back!" she shouted, and in that moment, Sarah realized the truth. The woman wasn't just a victim. She was something powerful, something supernatural. A strange light flickered around the woman, illuminating the dark clearing. "You have no power here," she declared, and with that, she reached out toward the man, who recoiled in horror. As the confrontation escalated, Sarah watched in awe as the woman unleashed a force that sent the man staggering backward. His cries turned to shrieks as he dissolved into shadows, vanishing into the night. Breathless, Sarah turned to the woman. "What are you?" "I'm like him, but I fight against his kind," the woman said, her features softening as the tension faded. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this. I had no choice." Sarah, still trembling, nodded slowly, trying to process everything. "What now?" The woman smiled faintly. "Now, you go home. You've done more than you know. I'll be okay." As Sarah made her way back to her car, she felt a mixture of relief and confusion. The drive home was eerily quiet, the road illuminated by the moonlight. But one thing lingered in her mind, the haunting realization that some things in the dark were far beyond what she could comprehend. When she finally pulled into her driveway, she took a deep breath, thankful to be safe, but haunted by the encounter. The night had changed her. She could never look at a night drive the same way again. As she stepped out of the car, she glanced back at the empty road, knowing that darkness could hide both horror and heroism. She promised herself that if she ever encountered someone in need again, she would choose compassion, but remain vigilant. The shadows might hold secrets, but they also held stories waiting to be told.